Hi, everyone. My name is Santana Shipley, and I'm the Community Operations Manager with the IAGA. Just want to start out by thanking all of you for being here today and introducing our panelist, Dave Barton, the Executive Director for the National Alliance for Accessible Golf. And with that being said, I will go ahead and swing things over to him to get us started.
Well, thank you, Santana. We appreciate the opportunity to visit you and the IAG membership again. This is webinar number 3 in a series of 3, and we will hope to cross your paths next week in Monterey if you have any additional questions. I'll do a quick video for those of you who haven't seen the first session or two. This is just a short 60-second video on our organization, the National Alliance for Accessible Golf.
Golf. It's a sport enjoyed by millions of people around the globe. Through the power of the game of golf, individuals with disabilities can build confidence, grow relationships with friends and family, and experience a sense of health and wellness that extends far beyond the course. The National Alliance for Accessible Golf continues to serve as the golf industry resource to help increase the participation of people with disabilities in the game of golf. Since establishing a grant program in 2010, the National Alliance for Accessible Golf has awarded over $1 million to programs around the country, providing avenues to play for individuals with disabilities. The National Alliance remains committed to serving as an education, advocacy, and resource center in promoting access and inclusion in golf for all. To learn more and join our community, visit us online at accessgolf.org.
Great. So just a little bit of information about us. Obviously, that's me, the executive director, a PGA member since about 2008. I got in the golf business when I retired from the Navy service after a career as a pilot there. So I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. For those of you that might have been on the other webinars, I was joined by Jan Beljan before, who's America's Side of Golf Course architect and an amazing person, and also Jason Spire, adaptive athlete, who is also on our board. So obviously we couldn't provide and deliver the education and resources that we do deliver without some great support. So we've got Kafka Grant and Wadsworth Golf Construction, a couple of our non-association partners. And as you can see by the list here, we've got a great group of golf industry associations that have been with us since the beginning and do help support us and make possible what we do. As mentioned, this is webinar number 3. So there'll be a little bit of review here in the context of we're going to be talking about the Onboarding Training Series today, which is where PGA and GCSAA members, as well as LPGA and Club Management Association folks can get education credits. We talked a little bit about the onboarding series in session 2, because conducting training with your facility leadership and staff is part of the self-assessment process. And then a little update on volunteer and staff training. So far, we've had the Golf Association of Philadelphia has taken advantage of our volunteer training for their recent event, as well as the folks in Arizona seem to be taking advantage of it. And we really appreciate that. Again, it's free and it's all just designed to help, volunteers and staff that are participating that have never worked with adaptive athletes all have a really positive customer experience and a customer service experience. Today, we're going to go briefly over the Alliance mission again, but we're going to get right into the onboarding series pretty quick. And what I'm going to do during that series is just break down the 6 lessons by going through a couple of the high points from each of the lessons. I've pulled some material from the actual onboarding training just to kind of show you what it looks like and give you a taste of it. To do the entire onboarding series, if you sit down start to finish to do it, it would take most people 2.5 to 3 hours to do it. But you can stop and start anytime you want to and spread it out and earn your education credits that way as well. We were established in 2001 after the ADA came out in 1990. The golf industry in the mid-90s realized that the ADA did not address the actual golf course. It addressed the buildings, and that was true for campgrounds. It addressed the buildings that host the campgrounds, but not the camp facilities as far as how accessible they are to individuals with disabilities from a barrier-free environment. We've been able to function through, again, association support and really primarily for years with some great support from the USGA, who really facilitated our having a grant program where we provide small grants to golf programs that have elements of inclusion to bring people into the game. And we're working hard to start that grant program back up in 2025. Other than that, we support the golf industry, therapeutic organizations. Obviously, the health and wellness benefits of golf are well known, and so involvement with recreational therapeutic specialists is very important to successful programs. And I'm sure when it comes to having events and programs at your facilities that may be member courses in your particular state or region, there would be these healthcare professionals that are looking for ways to participate and contribute, and you should definitely be looking for them as well. So we provide on-demand and in-person education. We just launched this education platform at the start of this year. We launched GiA&x a few months before that, and really, this is our sweet spot. This is what we do. We've had these resources for a long time, but we spent a lot of time reformulating them into on-demand type of education that was much more accessible and really kind of distill down the ADA into usable parts that can be more easily interpreted and also put into practice at your particular facilities. We don't run programs or competitions, which makes us a little bit unique, and that's somewhat purposeful. We are simply an education, advocacy, and resource organization. So that lets us be very objective and neutral about what's going on in adaptive golf, as we're not kind of home teaming it for a specific region or state or particular program. We want everybody to succeed. So all of our efforts are delivered in the areas of getting information folks to help them do that. Just a quick name drop there. I mean, you might recognize some of these names, but we're going to go right over this. But you can look back on this slide if you want to, just to show you that we're very well connected and have a very strong board with most of the industry association leaders from around the country at the primary golf associations. We're real proud of that. All right, so GiA&x, Golf Access and Inclusion Network. For those of you that have been on the first webinar too, just briefly, it is a communication and networking forum. It's free, just takes a username and password, and you can get on there and ask questions of anybody or answer questions if you have the answer. So it's really just a great place to network and communicate. We've also got a calendar on there, and we're encouraging folks that are hosting adaptive events and tournaments to put flyers up or put their information up there, because again, there's a lot of great activity in the adaptive golf community across the country now. And, we just hope to make it easier for folks to at least go to one spot and see if they can find out a little bit of information before they have to go to 4 or 5 to find out what's really going on. So if you're a member of GiA&x, you can put information about whatever you've got going on in your state or region on that calendar. And I'm sure the other states or regions would appreciate seeing it, as would the golfers who come to GiA&x to see what kind of competitions might be going on around the country. The discussion boards can be pretty interesting sometimes. And so we've got some good topics that have been had and discussed recently. And if you've got a question you want to have or start a topic, it's a great place to do it. And again, it's free, and just a username and password is required. This is what it looks like when you get there. You can access our education hub through GiA&x. You can access the calendar of events, and you can also see where the different chat rooms are per se, but these are flexible and might move around a bit here and there, but that's pretty much like any other communication platform would be. Page 2 of that really is the bottom part of the main landing page. And what I really want you to focus on here is on the right-hand side. This is where you can access most of the resources, if not all of the resources that we provide for the golf industry beyond education. You can access Golf Inclusion Monthly here. As far as the program and facility listings, we're about to relaunch our facilities and program database. Some of you and some of your organizations may have recently answered the adaptive golf car data call that we put out, and we appreciate that. So we're going to be including that information and sending that back out to help, again, get more information easily available to those that need to know where these adaptive golf cars are, where these programs are, etc. The highlighted box on the right there comes in quite handy for golf course operators. I have operated and owned facilities in my past before I got on the association side. And policies are important. Every golf course has them. But the key policies that come into play related to adaptive golfers are highlighted there for accessibility statements, cart path only scenarios, and service animals. And these policy templates can be easily adapted to a particular facility depending on what their policies are and how it works best for them. And private versus public, as we well know by now, the ADA technically does not apply to private clubs, which would be considered Title III clubs, or Title II if you're government, public accommodations. So private clubs do not fall under the compliance requirements of the ADA unless they operate in a way that has them meeting public accommodation standards, such as having routine golf tournaments on Monday when the course is closed as a revenue generator for their facility, or having weddings as a routine revenue generator for non-members of their club. So private clubs still need to pay attention to the ADA in some cases, even if it's just to have temporary accommodations if they're going to be having the public on their property beyond just a member's guest. So with the Education Hub, we're going to talk about the onboarding training today, but there's a bunch of other stuff on there we've already talked about, the self-assessment process, which we encourage all facilities to do. As you move forward working with golf courses in your areas that may be hosting your adaptive golf tournaments or programs that you're helping them run, I would highly encourage you to work with the golf course to get them to do a self-assessment. It's really a simple process that has them, check their golf course for being barrier-free, checks out their website to see if they're accessible, and a few other things that really think is what a course needs to do to, establish themselves as an accessible and inclusive facility. Websites are typically a customer's first impression, so it's best if they are accessible or at least moving that way. It can be a little bit expensive to do that, but it's something that every facility that has services or things offered needs to look into. And then we've got some great micro learning lessons on there regarding different scenarios. Again, cart path only, what you can or can't ask about service animals. And again, education credits are available if you complete the onboarding training series through the Education Hub. This is what the landing page of the hub looks like. We've got it broken down into the primary area where you would need to go would be golf facility staff, professional coaches, and AGAs. That's pretty much the golf operations area. We've just added some stuff in there as well for coaches, which we're really proud of. We didn't create it, but it's really good information. The EDGA developed some information called Learning from the Edges. It was a 43-page PDF. We turned it into a nice little lesson. And having taught adaptive golf in my past, I can tell you it's one of the best things I've ever looked at as far as giving someone an introduction to what they really need to know as they're starting their journey to be an adaptive golf coach. So it's just really good information that we're sharing on their behalf. We talked about volunteer training before, and also we're working on ramping up the healthcare professional area to, again, draw more recreational therapists and folks into the game. And each of those groups has a hyperlink to the bottom of it that can be used to share with other people to send them to the training if you want them to do some of this material. And you can access that via our website as well. This is the landing page once you get in the Education Hub. All right, and you can see that we've got what I just mentioned on the previous page, but we're going to focus on that bottom left picture today, which is the Onboarding Training Series. And we're going to talk about that coming up pretty quickly here. So there's really 6 chapters. The first is really just a short introduction. But as you can see there, we cover the Americans with Disabilities Act and golf. So basically, we talk about the law, and we talk about it just enough so that you know what the law is and you know what it means. We're not going to go through the entire government document. There wouldn't be enough slides or paper for us to do that. And it can be very complicated. So again, we've really distilled that down into what is the impact of the ADA on a golf course operator. We talk about types of disabilities and of course, USGA Rule 25. And we give you some examples of how to create inclusive environments through the policies that you have in place and some subtle things you can do in marketing. And then we also talk about how that inclusive culture that you want to have at a golf property or golf facility is created through the culture. And a lot of that comes down to communications and etiquette between your staff and the customers themselves. And then the very end, which those of you that attended the first session or two would have been familiar with, we get pretty in detail about the building and course access requirements that you can easily review with the checklist. And we're going to tell you all about that in just a second as well. So ADA was founded, it came about in 1990, and you would think that, 34 years later, these conversations would not be occurring. But the reality is there's a lot of golf courses out there in the world that are doing things really well as far as complying with the ADA. And there's quite a few out there that have some opportunities for improvement. Adaptive golf has been around for a long time, as many of you probably know on this call. It feels new because of some of the momentum that the USGA Adaptive Open and some other national events have created as of late, but it's been around for a long time. And again, it's a civil rights law that public accommodation, government or municipal or university facilities is required to comply with. So our approach to education is, here's the law, here's what you can do to not have the DOJ or the Department of Education call you. We don't enforce the law, we don't provide legal advice, but we do advise you on the things you can do to keep your course, out of trouble per se. Okay, we go to skip over that. All right, so in lesson 2, where we talk about the ADA in golf, okay, we've already had our introduction. Again, we just talk about the ADA, the law itself. We kind of cover architectural versus non-architectural barriers. And what I mean by that is a door that is too wide, or excuse me, a door that is too narrow, or steps that are too steep could be considered an architectural barrier. But there's other barriers to things such as cultural barriers or lack of awareness that create problems for folks to play golf as well. We're going to talk a little bit about readily achievable again and what that means, and some basic compliance requirements and how you can manage the costs of compliance. So we're not going to cover all of these in detail, but when you get through session 2 of the training, you'll have a lot more information about that. Okay, so let's digest that just for a second without reading it to you. Again, all we're doing is, talking about the law that says an individual that, wants to play golf basically has the same right as anybody else to play golf if they have, if they have a disability. And that's what it comes down to. No different than has a right to maneuver freely around a grocery store or see the goods and services they offer on their website. They have a civil right or a right to play golf at your facility if it's a public facility. So again, here's a brief overview of the barriers, and this is just some of the material straight from our slide. The gentleman in the picture on the left, his name is Tom Houston. He's been in that particular device for over 40 years. He's in his mid to late 80s. He's now shot his age. I don't know how many times since he's been in that car. Tom's on our advisory board. He's got some amazing photos of him with Arnold Palmer and Chichi Rodriguez back in the day. So he's been fighting this battle for a long time as far as advocating. But, the stairs there are a classic example of a barrier right by the parking lot. Now, we can assume there's a ramp nearby, but if there was not a ramp nearby, that would be a problem for him to get up to the pro shop and play golf. That's an architectural barrier. Physical barriers can be things like merchandise racks that are too close together in the pro shop, or dining tables that are too close, or even a counter in the pro shop that a person in a wheelchair is not able to see over to speak with the customer service representative. And then, of course, environmental culture barriers as far as lack of websites, lack of published policies, and lack of leadership commitment to access and inclusion, all very important. As I mentioned earlier, we focus on Title II and Title III because that's where the golf courses are. Title I is all about employment. You can see that Title IV and Title V are other ADA titles or chapters per se, but Title III is basically public accommodations, and Title II are state and local government accommodations. So a government golf course, a university golf course would fall in that category, whereas your local golf course around the corner that's just privately owned or publicly owned or whatever it is, but it's available to the public, would be considered a public accommodation. So as I mentioned very early on, the built environment was addressed in the ADA, but not the golf course itself. In 2004, guidelines were published that included recreational facilities, and those guidelines were not adopted until 2010, and they became enforceable in 2012. So it can be really challenging sometimes for golf courses to understand, okay, which guidelines really do apply to me. And a lot of it depends on when your course and when the buildings were put into service. In some cases, those can be different times. We won't get too deep into that today, but that's something we can talk about in California if you happen to be out there. So as an example, what standards apply to your facility or the facilities you may be working with? I know many of you may not work on the green grass side, but you're at golf courses or may work at the golf course as well. But most of you are kind of in the association space as I understand it. But, being aware of this information is a great way to help your facilities get better informed. And so we'd encourage you to, share whatever education you can with them. So courses built between 2010 and 2012, or were you built after 2012? So what standards apply? We'll take a brief read on that. So if you're in that first category, the course or buildings were built between 2010 and 2012, you can choose the 1991 or 2010 standards. So there's flexibility there. If you were constructed after March 15th of 2012, you have to use the 2010 standards. So the question is, what if your facility, the buildings or golf course was built before September 2010 and doing new construction or alterations? So it's in essence a little bit of a combination of both if that goes on. So again, knowing when you're built and knowing when you were put in service is a very important thing to know as far as what your compliance requirements are. So I mentioned readily achievable a minute ago, so we always like to talk about this in most of our presentations. So there are plenty of courses out there that are, doing the right thing. We think most are attempting to do the right thing. There are provisions in the ADA that, allow you to not have to spend money until it's readily achievable. Okay, which basically means that if you're the business owner, if you're not being renovated, you might not be required to make changes, but you are going to be required to make them if they're easily accomplishable without much difficulty or expense, which is known as readily achievable. And so each business owner has to determine what is readily achievable for their business, and there's some guidance for that as far as what that means. So, in a nutshell, all businesses are not equal in the ability for them to spend money. We all see different golf courses every day. You might have a single operated golf course with let's just call it what we used to say mom and pop type of golf course. They're breaking even, they're barely getting by, but they've got a great golf course and they've got great customers, but they're not putting a lot of money in the bank, versus a golf course that is supported by a large financially successful parent corporation, or perhaps it's part of a multi-property ownership group. So the course that is more financially solvable would be given less latitude regarding complying with the ADA than a course that is less financially viable. All right, so we talked about privately owned golf clubs already. Many think that the ADA does not apply to them. That is predominantly true, again, unless that golf course meets the standard of public accommodation through usage patterns, which deviates from member-only standard. And we touched on those a moment ago as far as what they might do as far as weddings or golf tournaments or things like that that are in addition to the purely member benefit and are designed for public access to generate revenue for the facility. So just a couple of links for you here and things you can check. How do you make this financially feasible? There are disabled access tax credits and barrier removal tax deductions that can be used. And both of these links can tell you about that. Obviously, there's not a long list of golf courses that are $1 million or less in revenue or 30 less employees, but they are out there, right? And so being able to offset the cost of some of your purchases by $5,000 for barrier removal and some other things is a good thing. Same goes for the barrier removal tax deduction. They can both be used in the same year in combination, but there's certain things you can't use them for, and it depends on when you were put in service, because if you're put in service after a certain date, your building should have been built that way versus being done retroactively. And that's where the IRS will take a stance. If it was supposed to have been built that way, then you're going to have a hard time getting the credit. Now, we do believe that this disabled tax credit can be used to offset the cost of an adaptive golf car. There's a tax opinion letter from 2012 from a CPA in Colorado, and we agree with it, that says that if you purchase an adaptive golf car, you should be able to take advantage of this $5,000 credit for that particular golf cart. It would be no different than that tax credit applying to, say, for example, the requirement for a swimming pool to have a couple of lifts in it to get an individual with a disability in and out of the pool. That is required for that person to use the pool. In some cases, an adaptive golf car that is able to go on the greens and is built in such a way as not damage greens and tee boxes is something a golfer with a lower body impairment could require to play golf. And so that's something that, again, is it's actually the elephant in the room in the golf business, because they are not inexpensive. There's a whole lot of golf facilities that do not have them yet, and understandably so. But so we're encouraging courses to look at how to kind of combine their resources short term, share assets until the supply can kind of catch up with the demand, because the demand will only be increasing for these as more and more people learn about what they can do with an impairment and still play golf. So chapter 3 basically is types of disabilities. We just put this in here because there are so many different types of abilities. I think, predominantly when we think about golfers with disabilities playing golf, it's easy to see the golfers sometimes with prosthetics arms, maybe prosthetic legs, maybe an adaptive golf car, but also, there's individuals that are less visible, less apparent disabilities, whether it's neurological or intellectual, if they're right in front of you. It just depends. So there's just a range of disabilities. I think it pays for an operator to understand and their staff to understand the different types of disabilities, because the way that you communicate with different types of disabilities, individual disabilities, is different. What you should or should not say, what you should or should not do related to their equipment, is something that I think staff needs to understand better. Again, because we want the staff to have a positive experience as well as the golfers themselves. Just some numbers for you. These numbers have been around for a long time, but needless to say, there's about 27% of individuals in the country that have a disability, and there's a large percentage of children that have a disability. And I can tell you, more and more people, because of, again, what I mentioned earlier, are seeing the TV coverage of the Adaptive Open. So I would suspect your golf courses are starting to get more and more questions about access to the golf. If they have an adaptive golf cart, what kind of programs do they have? So I think it, really is in y'all's best interest to, help your member courses in any way you can. I know that's why you're listening in on this call. Golf Association of Philadelphia has a great website that they've created, Gap Adaptive, and there's more than one state or region that's doing that, but theirs is a very good example of how to get good information out there for the benefit of your golfing community in your region. The last study was done probably in 2018, so that's something we're looking at. It's probably due to update this study, but again, you can see that there's some pretty big numbers of folks out there that used to play that no longer do. It's about 6.2 million. So we kind of have to ask ourselves, why are they not playing anymore? Maybe they aged out. Maybe their disability developed to a level where they couldn't play anymore, or maybe they're just finding it more challenging to play. But the equipment is better. The facilities are getting better about welcoming people. So again, just ask yourself, what might be keeping people from participating in the game of golf, and then we'll see if we can all help change that statistic. I won't get too deep into this. The ADA has a disability when it comes to the law per se, and record and regard. It can get a little bit confusing. But bottom line is, if you've got a inability to do a major life activity or basic activity with no little difficulty, such as walking, that's bringing you into the area of concern for the folks that wrote the ADA. These are just some of the list of the types of disabilities that are considered disabilities from the ADA. So we put this up there just to remind you that you're not going to, the golf courses themselves, you're not going to know sometimes if an individual standing in front of you has a disability and the ADA applies to them or not. And so it gets into, again, helping your staff better understand that the best approach is to treat everybody equitably, which I know seems like a common practice, but oftentimes folks that are not quite as informed can get a little tongue-tied when they're working with somebody at the counter that might have a speech impediment or hearing difficulty or hearing impairment, or might even have an intellectual disability, because they're just not accustomed to communicating or talking with individuals like this. So the more you have this conversation out loud with your staff and maybe practice some scenarios, the better off everybody will be at a particular facility. When it gets into terms like disability and impairments, we think in terms a lot of functional abilities, like how can you function, and so it really comes down to impairments. So lower body impairments create a functional ability issue for golfers with disabilities, and the same goes for other types of functional terms such as intellectual, neurological, including PTSD. And so these all fall under the category of different types of functional terms or impairments. If you haven't seen some of these, there's just a ton of amazing equipment out there. We've already talked about it. You got the Solo Rider on the top left. You got special grips. You got gloves at the bottom to help folks that can't hold on the club, whether they're stroke victims or have some paralysis in their hands. The vehicle on the bottom right is a newer vehicle called the Verticat. It's very good as well. There's also another vehicle out there called a Solo Rider, or excuse me, a Paramobile or a Paramotion. And, they've all got great wheelbases and will not damage a green any more than a lawnmower would. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm sure that they're running competitions now, though, that Rule 25 is now a rule. It used to be a local rule, or appendix rather, where if an organization was having a tournament, they could put Rule 25 into play or the modifications for golfers with disabilities, but it's no longer a local rule. It's part of the rule book itself. So there should be no doubt about what the rules are. But at the IAGA, Colton Dean will be there. I'll be there with Colton Dean doing a panel with the Golf Association of Philadelphia. And they're going to talk about competitions, and they're going to talk about some of the lessons they learned as far as rules and marking the golf course, and some things they had to do a little bit differently than they thought they would as far as preparing for an adaptive golf tournament, so that the field was as equitable as possible. So be well worth your while to listen in on that one if you're going to be there. All right. So again, the rule addresses these particular impairments or disabilities: players who are blind, amputees, players who use assisted mobility devices, and players with intellectual disabilities. Because typically, if there's mobility issues, they stem from neurological impairments as well as physical injuries or birth defects. So moving into part 4 now, which lesson 4, which is about policies and marketing. All right. So part 1 and part 2 of lesson 4 is going to be about policies and marketing and communication, disability, and etiquette. And so what we want you to do with respect to policies and marketing is just understand the importance of your website, images in your pro shop, policies, and things like that, that really send a message to those that want to come play golf at your facility that you welcome golfers with disabilities. If they are not unable to interpret what's on your website, or better understand that you might or might not have an adaptive golf car, or what they need to do to be sure that it's available, it just ultimately will cause conversations at the pro shop counter that can be avoided with just a little planning and a little more advanced communication. So I think you just got to think that way. And I say this as an operator, it's former operator, it is difficult. It's very difficult to put so many things sometimes in writing and be a master of all of them. But these individuals with disabilities, they are, for the most part, they're going to check out what you have to offer beyond tee times before they show up. They want to know what your course kind of looks and feels like. They want to understand better what sort of facilities you have there, so that when they show up, they're not surprised about where they can or cannot go. Accessible websites. We are working on updating ours slowly but surely, but it is something that a golf course would want to move towards. And a lot of the providers of golf software management now are including these features as part of their offerings when they work with golf clubs. But it goes beyond font, it's color, it's images, it's moving images, it's describing pictures, and these sorts of things. And so I think, number one, the website is, generally speaking, the first impression someone's going to have about a facility. And that's going to be true if you host an adaptive golf tournament. They're going to go to that golf course's website, or they're going to go to your AGA's particular website, and they're going to be looking for information about this adaptive golf tournament. So you got to think about who is going to be looking at our website. What are the individuals with disabilities going to be able to see? Where do we have areas on our website that need to be designed better so that it's not causing a problem with someone understanding easily what is being offered? A lot of courses use an accessibility statement. And this is just a very, very small example, but it's really, a lot of courses say things like this. They talk about, hey, we're looking forward to having you at our property. But again, talking about your commitment to accessible and inclusive environments paints a very good picture. So again, this is not necessarily a requirement, but it certainly is encouraged, because again, someone looking at your website is going to say, okay, this course gets it. I want to be there. I want to play there. I want to go meet some people there, and I want to spend some money there. Okay. I've worked at both sides of the counter for a long time, assistant pro, head pro, director, the whole deal, in the back room as well. And there's not a day goes by where something unique doesn't happen at the pro shop counter. It's just part of being in customer service, and that's true for restaurants and stuff like that. So again, I think, take advantage of the off season now. For those of you that are having an off season, obviously it's ramping up in other parts of the country, but the onboarding series that we're talking about here is something that can be easily assigned to your staff, your leadership, or anybody that's forward facing with a customer to do as part of their onboard training, right? And so the more people that understand what's going on here, from leadership down through staff, the better chances a facility is going to have a great culture that is inviting for those that want to play golf. All right. There's nothing wrong with policies that encourage golfers to call ahead. There are some things you can't do with folks with disabilities. You're not supposed to ask them if they have a disability, but you can certainly recommend that if an individual requires additional access, that we'd love to get a call from them so we can ensure that we're as prepared as we need to be. There's nothing wrong with saying, we share an adaptive vehicle with another property. We'd like the opportunity to get that coordinated for you before you show up to the golf course, right? And so just a little bit of planning and a little bit of policy. I don't say it necessarily protects you from having unfortunate or, conversations that are not easy to have, but the effort has been made at least to facilitate a good experience for everybody. And I guess that's really what it comes down to in customer service. All right. And like I talked about before, we have policy templates that you can easily find, and they are templates. They're not perfect. They're not designed for every golf course. They're kind of fill in the blank sort of stuff. And so there's things in there that you might want to say, and there's things you might not want to say at your golf facility, depending on what type of course you have. But we do believe they'll give you a great place to start, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel by using them. Couple of images here. Again, if you've got some of these on your website or some of your golfers that might have disabilities that are playing golf or in tournaments, sends a powerful message, right? And then we go into communications and etiquette. Again, communicating with someone that is in a wheelchair is not altogether different from communicating with anybody, but there are certain things, as an example, that you just don't do. You don't grab their wheelchair. You don't do things like that. You don't push them out of the way. If an individual has a vision impairment, you don't come up behind them and tap them or grab them and say, here I am behind you. So I know that sounds pretty obvious, but again, there are just little things depending on the type of impairments that folks have that will, again, foster an awareness in your staff. And it'll also just foster confidence, confidence when they're talking to them. I will tell you this, I retired from a career in the Navy in 2005. And I was in Northern Virginia, and I taught for several years with an organization in Maryland called the Salute Military Golf Association. I'm a veteran, and I can tell you for the first few weeks that I showed up to work at a veterans clinic, and this was post 9/11, unfortunately, a lot of veterans returning with amputations and some serious injuries, and even I, who did 22 years in the military, was uncomfortable. I wasn't sure what I could say or not say about the individual's leg, or the leg that this person might not have, or the arm, or whatever might be going on with half of their face, quite honestly. So again, getting comfortable with just treating these individuals as people first, not getting caught up with the fact that they might have a disability, but getting more caught up in the fact that they're just a person who wants to play golf is half the battle. And I think if you can get your staff thinking that way, everybody's going to have a much better day at the golf course, whether they're answering the phone or whether they're out on the first tee. We talked about apparent and non-apparent disabilities before. You won't see them all, so how do you know? And that's the point. Don't assume, nor treat someone differently if they do have one you can see, right? So just treat everyone equitably. That's the bottom line. Person first language is something that you'll hear talked about. They're not a disabled golfer. They're not a handicapped person. They are a person with a disability. They are a golfer with a disability. They're not a deaf person. They're a person with a hearing impairment. And so the bottom line on that is individuals with disabilities should not be defined, nor do they want to be defined by their disability, right? So a couple of general do's and don'ts is just one of the slides from one of the discussions based on, one of the impairments. But basically, treat folks how you want to be treated. Ask before you help and be sensitive. Nothing wrong with holding the door for somebody, but they may prefer you ask, would you like me to get that door for you? There are those that want to get the door themselves. So just ask, don't assume. Think before you speak, always respond graciously. And again, the term is disability pride language again. So like we talk about, they are a wheelchair user versus being confined to a wheelchair or disadvantaged, or words like handicap are becoming less in vogue. That's why we like to use the word access flag versus handicap flags. The term retarded is not a good term. Hadn't been a good term for a long time, but you'll still see it showing up every now and then. So, learn to help your folks understand these things, and life will be much better. Okay, so we break down in a few slides here on our training platform different communications and etiquette techniques depending on the type of impairment a person may have. So you can see on this particular side, you've got intellectual, short stature, vision, and hearing. Okay, and on the next slide, you'll see we've got speech, neurological, and mobility. And as you go through the training, it's a little bit interactive. You can go back and forth and you can just kind of look in there and see some of the different ways to communicate with individuals who have different sorts of impairments. There's a lot of consistencies across them, but there's some that are unique, and it's not a big list. It's not complicated. We'll go through this pretty quick because this gets into the building and golf course access requirements. It's the 5th lesson. It's actually the 6th lesson because the introduction was there earlier, but so this is where we get into how you use the ADA checklist to assess a golf facility for being barrier free. So if you're going to be responsible for hosting golf programs or golf events, that ought to be being held at a golf course that's barrier free, right? An accessible golf course with an inclusive culture. That's where these things need to be happening. And that's the facilities that I think should be selected to host these facilities, the ones that are really making the effort to ensure that they have a barrier-free environment and are really working hard to put the ADA and these programs in place. Okay, so what's barrier-free? Basically, can a person navigate barrier-free from the parking lot all the way to the pro shop, play 18 holes, go back into the club shop, use the facilities, use the lounge, use the locker room, use the hot tub, sauna, whatever's there, and get back to their car? Can they do that without coming across a barrier that keeps them from getting from where they are to where they want to go? That's what a barrier-free environment is. And the way to figure that out is to use the checklist and to get on your feet or get in a golf cart and drive around everywhere as if you're that person and see what obstacles you run into. And if you find some, eliminate them. And that's how you become barrier-free. I won't go in detail here. We've got an interactive slide on our education hub that kind of highlights the key points. Obviously, parking, clubhouse, accessible routes. I'll talk about accessible routes. Accessible routes or golf cart passage, they don't have to be paved. They don't have to have any prepared surface on them, but they do have to be 48 inches minimum wide. They do have to be sloped at a level that is manageable per the ADA. And so as an example, too, if you've got prepared surfaces on them and you have curbs, okay, like a lot of cart paths have curbs on them, nothing wrong with the curbs, but you've got to have a space or access, no curb, that's at least 60 inches wide every 75 yards. So wheeled vehicles can get on and off those paths, right? So if you click on each of these in the training, you'll see different answers for what the ADA standard is. And that's an overview picture. We go further on how to evaluate your course for success. And we talked about the facility self-assessment, and there's a checklist for that. And we're going to get into that in just a second. So the ADA put this checklist out with the Institute for Human-Centered Design several years ago, 2016. It's a 7-page checklist with big pictures, and I'll show you a couple examples of them. Here again, here's an accessible route for entrance to the facility. That's not the same as an accessible golf route. That's for a hallway or doorway. It has to be 36 inches minimum, all right? But this will let you go through the entire course with pictures and give you all the specifications you need to access your buildings and your facility for access. A little more stuff that's more golf specific. We talked about the curbs on cart paths. We talked about teeing grounds. How many teeing grounds have to be accessible for a person with a disability? Depends on how many teeing grounds you have, right? So if you have 2 teeing grounds for a hole, you have to have at least one of them that is accessible. Okay, so it just kind of goes up from there. So those numbers are there for you to take a look at, and it goes through other things on the golf courses too, weather shelters, accessible restrooms, things like that. Is something to think about, especially at tournaments. And some of you have been involved with the Adaptive Open may know this. If you're going to have a portable facility, a porta potty or whatever you want to call it, if you're going to have that on your facility in lieu of an accessible permanent facility, okay, you certainly need to have an accessible sized portable facility or porta potty. The question is, if someone rolls up there in an adaptive golf car that has no lower body mobility, how are they going to get from their adaptive golf car into that porta potty? Right. And so the USGA realized this, and some of the volunteers did at the first Adaptive Open. And so that's why they include and put a wheelchair next to the porta potties so that the individual that has to use a wheeled vehicle to play golf is able to transition themselves from their golf car into the wheeled vehicle that would then, into the wheelchair that would then be able to use the porta potty. So it's not just good enough to have the porta potty out there if you're expecting golfers that are going to be using adaptive golf cars. All right. So pro shop, little things, is a service counter, any part of it low enough where an individual with a wheelchair can make good eye contact with you without looking over the counter. But these are just little things that are in there. Putting greens, most putting greens have an entrance and egress route because mowers have to get on them. But some of them on some courses can be treacherous and can be sloped. So it's just something to be aware of. We talked about portable restrooms already, right? So if you're going to have two, be sure one of them is the kind on the left, and be sure that you've got something that allows the person that actually might need to transition the ability to do so. And as far as, kind of closing on this, it's really all about attitude. I hope this doesn't sound like it's a lot or overwhelming, because in the end, we do think from an access standpoint, we think most golf courses are doing better than they think they are. We would just like to encourage them to check it out and do the self-assessment and confirm from themselves where they're at. And then again, I think it just eliminates a lot of unnecessary worry about what you may or may not be doing correctly when you see that you're probably doing a lot of things right as an operator, but there's still a few things that you might want to consider putting on the list to do. And that includes some things like the accessible website, maybe some updated policies and marketing, etc. When you get done with the onboarding training series, you get a certificate, and these certificates are able to be submitted directly to your organization that you may be affiliated with for education credits, and you'll be on your way. So that really kind of concludes the webinar series for you. Again, we really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about some of this stuff. It's what we do. We'll be looking forward to being in Monterey to talk a little bit about this for some of those that may not have been able to participate in these webinars, but also at the panel, we'll be talking about some other things. It's going to be the general session, I think, around 2 or 3 o'clock on November 4th, I believe. I'd like to ask you to, join us on GAIN. It's free. Get on there and kind of see what's going on, ask some questions, join the community, because it's a great way to network and to go from there. And with that, I think, Santana, we'll see if there's any questions this afternoon.
Yep. So it doesn't look like there's any questions in the chat as of right now.
That thorough brief, or it's 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon or somewhere. So all good. But no problem at all. Listen, if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to me directly. I'm easy to find on accessgolf.org, Dave Barton at accessgolf.org. And again, we'll be in Monterey for several days. So if you want to have a sidebar and just talk about different things, again, we're not out to enforce the will of the DOJ or the DOE. We're out there to, help advise owners and operators, and especially with AGAs, y'all are in a position to advise them as well. So we really want to help arm you with the tools that we think will help your member courses succeed in some areas that, again, demand is definitely going to be there. And as you can see, the sun all of a sudden decided to pop in here. So I got this nice shiny face right now. I apologize about that. But Santana, if there's no more questions, again, we appreciate the opportunity. I'm sure we'll touch base soon. And then we hope the rest of y'all have a great rest of the week.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dave. Just want to kind of reiterate a thank you to everyone's participation today, and a huge thank you to Dave and all of the panelists that have joined to give their time and expertise to these webinar series. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at shipley@iaga.org. And like Dave said, we look forward to seeing you guys at the conference. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
See y'all later. Thanks, Santana.
Thanks, Dave.